Hi, everybody. I am Mari Kuraishi, head of the Jesse Paul DuPont Fund here in Jacksonville, Florida. And I am so pleased to welcome you to this town hall around Lift Every Voice and Sing Park in the LaVilla neighborhood. We are co-hosting this town hall with the Jackson magazine, which has, I think, a lot of very loyal followers. Uh, and today with us is Ennis Davis of the Jackson, and also co-hosting this with Parks and Rec of the city of Jacksonville, Daryl Joseph, Jill Enns, Ivy Henderson are all here from Parks and Rec, and you'll hear from them all shortly. But I want to set you up for a real treat. You will hear all about LaVilla's history and how that played into the design of Lift Every Voice and Sing Park, starting with Ennis Davis. So, Ennis, over to you.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen. So the story of LaVilla predates the 1832 incorporation of the city. In fact, during the Civil War, Jacksonville was largely confined to what we now refer to as the historic North Bank. During much of the Antebellum period, thousands of West Africans were enslaved within the Gullah Geechee Cultural Heritage Corridor, where they cultivated crops such as rice, cotton, corn, and turpentine. This includes the LaVilla Plantation, which dated back to a Spanish land grant given to John Jones in 1801. Modern development emerged in 1857 with the construction of the Florida, Atlantic, and Gulf Central Railroad. Camped at LaVilla during the Civil War, the Union Army occupied Jacksonville, relying heavily on the former enslaved mustered into service as U.S. colored troops. During Reconstruction, these victorious Civil War veterans and other formerly enslaved in the area settled several communities around the small town of Jacksonville. In 1866, Francis Lee Ingalls subdivided the former LaVilla Plantation, providing land leases to 41 freedmen and USCT veterans to form the town of LaVilla. Largely comprised of Gullah Geechee descendants, many worked in the city's booming hotel, lumber, port, construction, and railroad industries. This growing population included James and Helen Louise Dillard Johnson, who moved to LaVilla from Nassau, Bahamas in 1869. A multicultural household, the family expanded in 1871 with the birth of James Weldon, and in 1873 with the birth of John Roseman, and again in the mid-1880s by taking in a 14-year-old Afro-Cuban boy named Ricardo Rodriguez Ponce. Growing up in the same household and attending college together, the Johnson brothers and Ponce enjoyed a lifetime bond. During the Gilded Era, railroad tycoons transformed Jacksonville into Florida's gateway city by making major investments in LaVilla. Henry B. Plant laid the foundation for the city to become a winter tourist resort by establishing a streetcar system and a railroad that directly connected the city to the north. Following Plant's lead, in the 1890s, Henry Flagler organized the Jacksonville Terminal Company to feed his rail expansion into South Florida. For decades, the Jacksonville Terminal and its associated rail yards operated as one of Jacksonville's largest employers. In 1901, a LaVilla mattress factory fire destroyed the downtown section of the city. While this great fire in 1901 was devastating, leaving 10,000 Jacksons homeless, it did not destroy LaVilla. As a result, even today, there are 19th century buildings that survive that predate the fire. Rebuilding the city after the fire resulted into Jacksonville becoming Florida's first major metropolitan area and city to surpass 100,000 residents prior to the Florida land boom. In this era, the city became known as a magic city to the Gullah Geechee and rural communities across the South as thousands flocked to its urbanizing neighborhoods like LaVilla. Home to a large, progressive Black community in the segregated South, LaVilla emerged as an early Chitlin Circuit destination during the formative years of ragtime, blues, and jazz, culminating with the first published account of blues singing on a public stage at the present-day location of the Claire White Mission in 1910. Yes, that's right, it happened here in Jacksonville, not New Orleans, Memphis, Kansas City, St. Louis, Chicago, or any other city that may have had more success in exposing their multicultural heritage and history. LaVilla was also an early destination for many immigrant communities seeking to carve out economic success in the booming city. This includes a Greek district on West Bay Street, a Chinese community along West Adams Street, a Jewish community situated near the intersection of Broad and Duval Streets, a Syrian community, and thousands of Cuban Americans involved in the area's cigar manufacturing industry. The legacy of LaVilla's multicultural past still lives on today in the form of local culinary dishes that are deeply tied to our region, including camel rider sandwiches, seafood bowls, garlic crabs, and good old-fashioned barbecue. Home to the largest train station south of Washington, D.C., the Great Migration would eventually make Harlem the LaVilla of the North, as thousands of local Black residents like Zora Neale Hurston, A. Philip Randolph, Augusta Salvage, and Frankie Manning left the South, leading to a renaissance in Harlem in the 1920s. During the Great Depression, several public policy and planning efforts negatively impacted LaVilla. In 1929, Jacksonville became the first city in Florida to adopt the Comprehensive Planning and Zoning Ordinance. This segregationist-driven plan used Euclidean or exclusionary zoning practices to force undesirable uses in neighborhoods like LaVilla in order to foster a better quality of life for communities where Black residents were legally prohibited to live. In addition, the National Housing Act of 1934 led to the creation of residential security maps that ranked neighborhoods by the estimated riskiness of mortgage loans. Known as redlining, this discriminatory practice resulted in LaVilla being fenced off as an area where banks would avoid investments based on it being a Black neighborhood. Despite being forced to reside in a separate but unequal landscape, descendants of the former enslaved still found a way to build a self-sustaining environment filled with history, culture, music, food, community, and an authentic sense of place. As an example, Abraham Lincoln Lewis grew from being a mill hand at a local lumber mill to become one of Florida's first Black millionaires, serving as the president of the Afro-American Life Insurance Company. Nevertheless, a decline in rail travel and additional public policies and planning decisions would eventually rip the neighborhood apart. For example, the Housing Act of 1937 allowed the leveling of nearby Hansontown to create housing projects. During the 1950s, Interstate 95 was built through the heart of LaVilla, forming a new physical barrier between Northwest Jacksonville and downtown, displacing thousands of residents as a result. Later, a negative side effect of desegregation was the decline in the Black business community as a result of decades of unequal public investment, leaving historically Black neighborhoods unable to compete with other areas of the region. Many residents with the means to do so left the neighborhood, further weakening its economic foundation, resulting in the decline of Ashley, Broad, and the Davis Street commercial districts. After years of demolition and failed urban renewal attempts that ignored the neighborhood's rich heritage and history, LaVilla is well known locally as a place filled with vacant lots. This leads some to believe that this community is a blank slate. Well, this would be an incorrect assessment. Despite the attempts to erase the neighborhood in previous decades, it still exists and deserves an honest and transparent opportunity for inclusive and an equitable rebirth. A rebirth that economically stimulates the surrounding area while paying homage to the past and those who have paved the way for this generation and future generations to come. With this in mind, Lift Every Voice in Singing Park, along with the first phase of the Emerald Trail, which is shown here, are set to serve as foundational anchors for celebrating the accomplishments of the Johnson brothers and the history, culture, and heritage of Florida's first urbanized Gullah Geechee settlement, the neighborhood of LaVilla.
I need to unmute. Thank you, Ennis. I get goosebumps every time I hear you talk about the history of LaVilla. It is just such an amazing, creative neighborhood. And it's really what Walter saw when we got him to come here. Just a quick administrative note. As you all are listening to people speak and you have questions, feel free to use a Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom screen, and we will address them as soon as everyone's had a chance to speak. And now I am going to let Walter speak. We have a short video that I'm going to share right now.
I try to take the most mundane spaces and make people see something beautiful in them. These can be parks, these can be streets. Everything is a dormant piece of sculpture in the urban environment. My name is Walter Hood. I'm a landscape and public artist. Function in a way for most projects, the program is already written. We try to start in a different place, and that's through its history and through the cultural patterns and practices that act upon a space. The first site to be developed as part of the plan will be Lift Every Voice and Sing Park, which is placed on the historic site of the Johnson's family. The design for the park is inspired by the song. A large half of the site is lawn, which is lifted up in the air, and half of the site is a garden, which relates directly to the house and its archaeology. The shotgun is used as a muse, as a way in which to bring that historic past forward. On its north side, a stage is created almost as an amplifier, the building giving its voice back out to the city. And in return, the lawn is shifted and rises up. And between the house and the lawn, there's a relationship, one that talks about a past and one that talks about a future. The elements of the park include an infinity fountain, terrace seating, an entryway onto the stage, historic building footprints, a poet's walk along its west side, a passive garden with seating areas with tables and chairs around the infinity fountain, a trail with specialty paving that reconnects to the rest of the city, and festival lights and street paving that creates a distinct and different precinct. And lastly, a commemorative element which pays homage to the brothers and their musical history. We see different events being able to take place, again, through organized and also through passive use. The Poet's Walk becomes this linear connection from the north and south, but it also becomes a buffer from the east and west between the public park and the new housing that is built. And lastly, Lift Every Voice and Sing Park offers a new way to think about African American culture and history. We must celebrate difference by being different. The park exclaims itself on Lee Street that you are in a different precinct. By preserving our built history, when everything is erased, then what is left becomes even more precious.
I hope you enjoyed that short video from Walter Hood. I am now going to take a minute to talk about the elements of the park and just sort of deconstruct it a little. Walter started on that, but I think it's worth going into a little bit further. But before I go into that, I want to note that Walter spent and his team spent time here talking to various stakeholders, among them Ennis, of course, but also members of the Cultural Council and uh, people from the Ritz Museum, but most importantly, Lloyd Washington, head of the Durkeeville Historical Society, who played such a key role in making this park a reality. It was his efforts that led to the park being named and designated Lift Every Voice and Sing Park. He made sure that it took place on the place where the Johnson brothers uh, grew up. So I want to note that the design that Walter and his team put together owes no small part to to Lloyd's effort and even his original designs. So now I'm going to share something slightly different. It is the slide deck that Walter put together for us. And this is just I'm starting in the middle of it because a lot of Walter's slide deck talks about the history of LaVilla, which Ennis covered so incredibly well. But I'm starting here. You should be seeing a picture of um, the three shotgun houses that were not demolished in the urban renewal of the 1990s and are currently placed right next to Jennifer's Hall. And you will see here, in Walter's words, how he wants to use the houses by mounting them on a concrete plinth. As he puts it, he says, this gesture removes the houses from the brick footers, mobilizing their form into individual monuments that resist the romanticized ideal of the passive restoration and idealization of the past. The shotgun houses gain new terms of engagement that only recognizes the displacement of a once ubiquitous architectural expression, but reinterprets its character as a new actor within the neighborhood. And I think it's important here to note that it's a new actor because it is not meant to be a recreation of the Johnson Brothers home. Uh, as many of you know, the Johnson Brothers were actually born into a middle class family, and they had a two-story house, far larger than the shotgun house that is going to be placed in the park as a musical stage. It's probably looked a lot more like the house on the far right of this slide rather than what you might see as a stage filling in for their house. And you should see here a picture now of the park from the southeast corner. And I'm going to stop here for a moment to say that this trail that you see on the right-hand side with the yellow hexagonal tiles, that's actually the Emerald Trail. And so when the Emerald Trail's Model Mile comes in, this is part of the Model Mile, and it will direct bikers, walkers, straight by Lift Every Voice and Sing Park. Right at the bottom southeast corner is a wildflower garden with a sculpture of the Johnson Brothers at the piano. This is, I think, something that Lloyd brought into the design um, to commemorate the actual composition of Lift Every Voice and Sing. Between the wildflower garden and the musical stage, you see a sort of brick delineation of the actual site of the Johnson Brothers home. And so you will see that the stage is not on the home, neither is a wildflower garden. And we want to make sure that that's sort of clear. When you walk in it, I'm sure it'll be a lot more clear. And then you see the shotgun house and the lifted lawn in the back. This is a view from the northeast corner where you can clearly see the lifted lawn. The words "every voice and sing" are on the back part of the lawn, but not the word "lift," because the very lifting of the lawn represents the lift. And you can see the musical stage. You can also see to the right of the park the new housing that is supposed to come in. It's multifamily housing, sort of townhome style, and right next to what is the Poet's Walk. We'll see another picture of that in just a minute here. This is a view from the garden side with the Emerald Trail straight in front of us. And this is the view from the stage. If there are musical performers or other performers in the stage, this is what they would see. As you can see, the lawn becomes a natural amphitheater for viewing the performances at the musical stage. And there'll be benches, but it will also be possible for wheelchair users and others to be able to get access to the audience segment of the park. This is what it would look like from the amphitheater. And you will see that the stage has this little sort of amplifying structure that makes it possible for the music and the sound to boom out. This is the little splash pad that Walter thought might be nice for little kids, but also for those of us who might enjoy a little respite from the Jacksonville summer heat. And finally, this is the Poet's Walk, which is lined up next to the residential units that should be going into the west of the park. There is a double alley of trees, partly to demarcate the Poet's Walk, where we hope to commemorate all of those creatives that you saw on Ennis's slide who ended up in Harlem, between Zora Neale Hurston, Augusta Savage, and all of the people who came through Jacksonville and ended up in other parts, but for that time when they were in Jacksonville, made this one of the cultural hotspots of the South. So this double alley of trees is meant to demarcate the Poet's Walk, but also to muffle a little bit of the sound and the visuals for those people who are living in the townhomes. I'm going to leave it on this slide here and turn it back to Parks and Rec, Daryl and or Ennis and Ivy. I want to turn the screen back to you so that you can talk a little bit about how the park fits within the city portfolio, your process for construction, public input component, Emerald Trail. Over to you.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Daryl Joseph. Thank you, Mari, for that. Daryl Joseph, Director of Parks for the City of Jacksonville. Truly excited to be here today talking about Let the Voice and Sing Park. This was a project that didn't just happen overnight. We've been working on it for a while. There's been a lot of progress that's happened recently, so we're really excited about that. Lift Every Voice and Sing Park, one of the things that we've noted, there are parks like this around the country. We feel like we have something really special here in Jacksonville with the Lift Every Voice and Sing Park. But one of the things that I would note is parks like this in other cities and other examples have really served as a catalyst to bring areas back to life. And we see that as an opportunity that we have here in Jacksonville. Not only that, I truly believe that parks bring people together. So some of the renderings that you see, one of the common themes is you see people gathering and really getting to know your neighbors, as well as understanding and learning something from a park space. So those are things and concepts that we're really keyed in on and making sure that we deliver. Going back to, from a concept standpoint, we didn't just make this up. There was a lot of community input that was provided to help us get to the point that we are today. With that said, we work with organizations, as Maury mentioned earlier, similar to the Durkeeville Historical Society, that provided us with the detailed information, as well as put time and energy into putting together a plan of what they felt felt the community would want to see. So again, taking a lot of those concepts regarding the performance stage, the statues, a water element, the garden component, all of those were actually taken from a conceptual plan and information that we received from community input. I'm glad we're having this forum today in a virtual setting. It provides us even more opportunity to get additional feedback, but we're excited about where we've been from this concept and honestly where we're moving forward to from a construction standpoint. The local historical knowledge, the storytelling, and the actual information has helped us understand the LaVilla experience. Really grateful that Ennis has kind of educated us on where things were. Really a great opportunity to move forward and pay respect to where this area used to be. Speaking of construction, I want to allow my project manager for this project, Jill Enns, to kind of give us some quick details as it relates to next steps and the construction component of this project. And then we'll be around for questions at the end. Jill.
Hi, I am Jill Enns. I'm a landscape architect with the City of Jacksonville Park and Rec Department. And I wanted to let you know that preliminary design and engineering plans are currently underway. We're expecting those to be complete in the summer of 2021. The park construction will follow all of City of Jacksonville procurement guidelines and processes, and the final design and contractor selection will be complete next fall of 2021. The construction is expected to be completed the following year, the fall of 2022, and the park opening shortly thereafter.
Maura, we'll turn it back over to you from there. Again, we're grateful for this virtual opportunity and look forward to additional information.
Thank you so much, Daryl and Jill. It's just been an incredible pleasure to partner with Parks and Rec and the Jackson and Walter Hood and Lloyd and others. So I hope this continues. Now, I see there are a bunch of questions in Q&A, but let me just sort of give you a couple more things before I open it straight to Q&A. One is that this is just the beginning, and as Daryl noted, the design process for Lift Every Voice and Sing actually incorporated the much longer design process that took place, I think, long before I showed up in Jacksonville with the city and others, where the community came together and co-created the charrettes for LaVilla, which were then given to Walter as input for the design of the park. And we want to continue that tradition for community engagement. Walter actually had a lot of other ideas for LaVilla, and as the sort of momentum for the park builds and the fundraising that we are engaged in sort of gains momentum as well, we would love to come back to the community and start talking about potential other elements of LaVilla. It is such a multicultural neighborhood. I think it has the potential for bringing together so many different communities in town that I think it's a very exciting prospect. I talked briefly about fundraising. I just want to be transparent about the role that the Jesse Ball DuPont Fund is playing in talking to other potential funders about not just Lift Every Voice and Sing Park, but other elements of LaVilla. We have contributed funds to the preparation process and will be making more contributions to the actual park and other elements that might come together, again, with community input. I'm sorry I'm being so vague, but I want to respect the fact that we need to engage in a dialogue about what the other potential elements might be. And so that's our role, and we want to stay in touch with all of you on this seminar. I will be reaching back out to you with email links for the video, the renderings, and would like to encourage you to know, if you know other people who might be wanting to stay in the loop on these conversations, to encourage them to do an email sign up. So that will be coming after the meeting. So now I am going to turn it over to one of my colleagues at the fund to help us start looking at some of the questions that have come in.
Thanks, Mari. Hi, everybody. This is Melanie Cost with the DuPont Fund. We're so grateful that you're able to join us today, and we've got some great questions coming through. To start out, Mari, we've got a great comment and question from Ellen Wiss, who said, I too get goosebumps listening to Ennis tell the story of our history and hope to revive and honor it for the benefit of all. Thank you. And Ellen also asked if you could explain the funding needs and opportunities. Mari, maybe you can go through a little bit of that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ellen. So the current estimate, which I defer to Daryl, is somewhere between $2 and $3 million for the park itself. But as you can see, the park is aligned with the Emerald Trail, so it would be important to make sure that the model mile for the Emerald Trail is fully funded as well, because it would be such a shame if the Emerald Trail too didn't have a chance to shine here. There are also ideas that Walter left us that include things like potentially recreating Augusta Savage's statue, commonly known as the harp, but in actual fact, for her, the statue, the harp, was inspired by Lift Every Voice and Sing. The sculpture that she created for the World's Fair was demolished at the end of the World's Fair because she did not have the funds to cast it properly after the World's Fair. So it has been lost. There's been, I know, a long-term, a number of stakeholders in town who have been really engaged in hoping that we might be able to bring that statue back. Wouldn't it be wonderful to bring it back to the neighborhood of LaVilla where Lift Every Voice and Sing was composed? So that's another element. The estimates for that are anywhere from $500,000 to $1.5 million. And as the fundraising potential picks up, and as we can engage with with stakeholders, including JTA, which is located just a couple blocks away from Lift Every Voice and Sing Park, given the fact that so many people came to Jacksonville on the railroad and left Jacksonville for points north, including Harlem, from that train station, it may be interesting to put something there. JTA is very interested in that, and we're engaged in conversations about the possibilities around that. So all of that, I think, exceeds the 2 to 3 million that we're talking about for the park, but I would love, first and foremost, to see the park built, and built to the beautiful vision that you see here on the screen. And I think there's so much more we could do in the neighborhood as we seek to revitalize it in the direction that Anna's pointed to, where we're not gentrifying it, we are honoring and recommitting to the diversity that existed here historically.
Thank you, Mari. You actually answered a question that had come in from Ben Rubin about the Augusta Savage sculpture, the harp. So it's great that we were able to talk about that. And Mr. Rubin, hopefully we answered your question. And if you have additional questions, you can drop them in the Q&A box and we'll get to those as well. Daryl and Jill and Mari, the next few might be for you from Nancy Powell. We've got a couple questions. We'll start with the first. The street seems so wide, the one on the left where you see the lights and the stripes. Looking at the two cars shown, is it to scale? I'm trying to envision people crossing that street.
That is a 24-foot wide street, and it's going to remain the existing width. So that's two cars passing each other in 12-foot lanes. So the image that you see rendered, the car is likely not to scale, and the curb location is slightly off. So that's it should be just as safe street to cross as it is now, and it's just a normal single lane both directions.
But I do think it was important for Walter Hood to really highlight the impact that I feel, the sense of destination that's being provided, so that the scale may be a little bit more from that standpoint. But I do think that's the direction that he was trying to go into, to really highlight the sense of place and the opportunity that we had with that street.
Great. Thank you both. One other question from Nancy. Well, she says, yay to the splash pad. I love the raised lawn. And then, is there any concern about not having shade on the lawn or on the seating?
There's no concern. Basically, the lawn, what we're looking at is artificial turf. And there's ways of cooling that and making that into a destination space as well. This will be a part that will require us to, to me, I always say a great park is never done. There are always things that you can do to improve and enhance once you see how the facility is being used. So we will continue to monitor that, but we are looking at that as being an artificial turf lawn.
Great. A question just came in, sticking with the park design, about bump outs at the intersections for on-street parking. Maybe Jill, you can comment on that.
We have additional parking and have been working with Downtown Investment Authority regarding adjacent parking locations or nearby parking for the park.
Yeah, with that, we didn't want to take away the park space. So we're going to maximize the actual block and maximize the amount of space that we have for the park. So we're looking at alternative locations within the area that can meet the parking need.
Great. And what type of outcomes or impact studies are intended for this community initiative over the next 5 years?
So as Jill just mentioned, we're working closely with DIA. They're looking at neighborhoods throughout the downtown and the downtown as a whole. So there's studies that are already in the works, and there's studies that have already done. We're about action at this point and how we move forward. So we're reviewing a lot of the information that's already available to us.
Thank you. We had a question from Gracie Sandinger about Hemming Park was quickly renamed to honor James Weldon Johnson. How did that decision, or did that decision, impact this park's plan?
It did not. The two separate parks. This park is to recognize the Johnson brothers and lift every voice and sing. So we're focusing on the plan for this location, and that was a separate action that had no impact on this park.
Thank you. We've got a great comment and question from Richie Mullaney. Thanks for the wonderful event. This is so exciting. I've seen some parks with permanent outdoor instruments like drums and chimes for children. Has there been any thought to adding those to this park? I think it would fit well with the inspiration for the space.
Not specifically this park. I mean, there's going to be an active cultural opportunity with the stage and opportunity for performers to actually perform on the stage. I mean, again, as we've talked about the trail coming through there, so there may be opportunities at other connection points, but we haven't looked at that as an opportunity specifically for Lift Every Voice and Sing Park.
Thank you. Follow up on the question of the harp statue. Does the inclusion of harp depend on the availability of funds or perhaps the actual cost of the sculpture, since $500,000 to $1.5 million is a large range? Mari, maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Sure. And we have been talking to a number of potential funders, and not just here in Jacksonville, but some national funders as well. And there is some interest from them about helping recreate the Augusta Savage statue. So I think, you know, the reality is that the execution of any plan does depend on funding. So I think it is a truth that the success of our fundraising efforts will determine whether we can do the statue. But I think everyone that I have talked to is in fact quite interested in the statue. So I think there's a very good likelihood that that might be one of the next priorities if we can identify, one, the right artist to recreate Augusta Savage's vision, and two, it may also in part depend on, there was the National Historic Trust did a feasibility study for the recreation of the statue, and this is where I got the number of $500,000 to $1.5 million. And they have noted that there is more than one city that wants the sculpture, not just us, but Chicago is interested, New York is interested, and so there may be some economies to casting multiple copies that may determine some of the cost issues. So I know there's a real committed group of people here who want to see the statue, and would hope very much that we can make it happen.
Thank you, Mari. We have one more question right now. How will this project generate economic development for downtown Jax aside from special events?
Well, I'm going to let Daryl answer this as well, but from my point of view, there's a little bit of a continuum, right? Downtown, from DIA to Downtown Vision, has always been interested in not just attracting great businesses to downtown to have their offices here, but one of the big targets has been attracting residents. And there's residential potential in downtown, but there is also residential potential here in LaVilla. And it is when we reach critical mass on residential that small businesses, whether it is coffee shops, restaurants, nightclubs, theaters, all of that begins to, have the audience that they need, the customer base that they need in order to think about locating more businesses downtown. So LaVilla is a very quick walk into downtown. The fact that there is residential potential here is always a plus. Then there is, the issue of reconnecting to Brooklyn. As Ennis pointed out, the highway kind of cut LaVilla off from Brooklyn, when in fact they were all sort of part of the same neighborhood. And there's a fair amount of light industry in parts of Brooklyn. Maybe those areas could become more attractive again as the amenities improve. And there's, of course, a whole lot of residential going up in Brooklyn. As that whole strip, Brooklyn, LaVilla, downtown, evolve into a much more residential neighborhood, I think the potential for economic development downtown with the kind of retail that we associate with those types of growth can happen. I personally, before I moved here, lived in the U Street neighborhood of Washington, D.C., which was a historically African-American neighborhood of U Street. And like LaVilla, after the riots of 1968, fell into, severe economic straits. After the subway came back to U Street, it became this complete renaissance. By the time I left that neighborhood, Warby Parker, Trader Joe's, Whole Foods, they had all come back because residents started coming back because it was such a quick walk into work, into downtown. And, who knows, maybe something like that can happen here in LaVilla, and a park like this can become the cornerstone of that renaissance.
And Maury, I'll chime in off of that. I think the key component for us is getting this project right, not just for the historical significance and what it means to the area and what it means to the city, but what it also means as a potential economic driver for the city. One thing that I also look at is we see this as a destination spot from a local standpoint, but also see this as a destination spot from a national standpoint. I can see people coming into town just for this. With marketing, that can happen. So we have to tell the story. Of course, locally, we know about it, we understand it, but this is not just a Jacksonville destination. This is a national destination that, of course, will bring individuals in. So that's why it was important for us as a team to get this project right.
That's a great segue into our next question, Daryl. Thank you. The question is, doesn't that potentially complicate existing gentrification? How do we engage the community behind LaVilla?
That's a great question, and we would love to hear from anybody who has ideas about how we can engage. We at the fund are prepared to continue to host virtual and perhaps one day real life conversations about how we can all together think about that question. It's not, I think, a question with a slam dunk answer. I don't think there are easy answers. I know that the Jackson magazine has featured examples of places that have done this well, and maybe Ennis, you want to speak about how other places have succeeded in avoiding gentrification, but it is absolutely a really important point.
Sure, I'll chime in on that. So what you want to have is with gentrification as opposed to gentrification. Essentially, what that means is a revitalization process where the existing community has a seat at the table. They pretty much say if you're not at the table, you end up being the meal. So there are several communities across Florida and in the U.S. in general that have had some success with gentrification. A good example is the Deuces in St. Petersburg, Florida, which has a similar history to LaVilla. In their particular case, their commercial corridor, South 22nd Avenue, I believe it is. They formed the Florida Main Street program. Main Street essentially teaches the community how to reinvest in itself and organize and brand and market, neighborhood commercial districts. So now today, that particular strip is home to a lot of Black-owned restaurants and businesses that hire people from that neighborhood. And essentially, when you break it down, the dollar is starting to recycle multiple times in that neighborhood before it leaves. So there's economic prosperity that comes with that redevelopment. So in short, if you want to withintrify and not gentrify, we have to be open and transparent with community engagement and reach out to the community. And in LaVilla's case, we got to remember, just because a lot of things have been torn down, the community didn't go away. The community is still there. There's a LaVilla on the west side of I-95 that we call the Rail Yard District or Newtown. There are people who are displaced that now live in areas like Durkeeville or Moncrief. And there are several churches that are still very active in LaVilla with families that have been here and date back to actually prior to the Civil War. So it's just a matter of reaching out to the community and working with the community in an open and transparent manner.
Thank you, Ennis.
Thank you, Ennis. We have one more comment, and then I think we'll probably close out our Q&A from Pam McClellan. She says, "You're so correct, Daryl. The Association for African American Life and History, created by Carter G. Woodson, will be hosting their 106th National Conference in Jacksonville in September 2021. The local chapter is the James Weldon Johnson chapter, and our new park will be a perfect future venue when hosting events like this." That is a great thing to keep in mind. Thank you, Pam. I think with that, we'll close out our Q&A. As Mari mentioned, we'll be sending a follow-up note with an invitation to sign up for updates and more information. And Mari, with that, I'll kick it back to you for some closing comments.
Thank you all for joining us here. And I want to thank again Ennis and Daryl for co-hosting this webinar. We hope to do more of these, and we hope one day we will be able to all meet in person at the new Lift Every Voice and Sing Park. Won't it be a wonderful day when we can do that? Thank you all.